The fire is almost out. You know this not because you can see it, but because you can't see anything at all. 10 minutes ago, you could still see the hills. You could see the trees. You could see the face of the person sitting right next to you. Now there is nothing, not a little dark. Not your eyes will adjust dark, just black. Your eyes are wide open. They are doing nothing. Somewhere out there, past the place where the light used to be, something is walking through the dry grass. You can hear it, but you cannot tell how far away it is. 40 steps? 400? Your ears are working overtime because your eyes have already given up. And here's the part that should scare you a little. You're going to lie here in that same blindness for the next 10 hours. The sun is not coming back until it decides to come back. Nothing you do will speed that up. This was not a bad night for our ancestors. This was every night. For around 300,000 years, this was just Tuesday. We love to talk about ancient humans fighting off lions. We love to talk about them surviving famine, sickness, and long, freezing winters. But almost nobody talks about the one thing that shaped their whole lives more than any of that. For half of every single day, our ancestors could barely see. And what they did with that darkness, how they learned to survive it, use it, and eventually turn it into something powerful, is one of the strangest and most important stories in all of human history. Almost nobody talks about it. So let's talk about it. Let's start with a hard truth. Human eyes are bad at night. Not just a little bad. Really bad. A lion has something called a tapetum lucidum. It's a kind of mirror sitting behind the eye. Light bounces off it and passes through the eye a second time. This gives lions roughly 6 times better night vision than humans have. A hyena can see clearly in light so dim that a human would see almost nothing at all. So picture the scene again. It's pitch black. You can't see your own hand in front of your face. But the animals sharing that same darkness with you, they can see you just fine. This wasn't a small disadvantage. Researcher Robert Sussman at Washington University in St. Louis spent years studying old human bones for signs of predator attacks. He found bite marks, tooth punctures, and drag marks on bones going back over 1 million years. Many of the attacks he studied happened during twilight or full darkness. For a huge part of our history, humans were not the top of the food chain. We were dinner. And dinner does not get the luxury of just waiting the night out and hoping for the best. Dinner has to find a solution. So here's the real question. If your eyes are useless in the dark and the things trying to eat you can see perfectly, how you survive 10 hours of that every single night for hundreds of thousands of years? The answer wasn't a spear. It wasn't a rock. It was something much simpler and much stranger. It was fire. Fire is older than most people think. Evidence shows humans were using controlled fire at least 1 million years ago in a place called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Some evidence points to fire use even earlier than that, maybe 1.5 million years ago. But here's the detail that changes how you should think about fire completely. For most of that long stretch of time, fire wasn't mainly a cooking tool. It wasn't mainly a way to stay warm either. Fire was night vision equipment. It was the only thing on the entire African plain that let a slow, weak-eyed, clawless animal like us see anything at all once the sun went down. And it was the only thing that kept the animals with better eyes from just walking straight into camp and helping themselves. A researcher named Richard Wrangham at Harvard has spent years arguing that learning to control fire might be the single biggest leap our ancestors ever made. Bigger than stone tools. Bigger than almost anything else. And the reason comes down to exactly this problem. A ring of fire around a sleeping group did something no spear could ever do. A spear can hurt a predator once it's already close enough to attack. Fire stopped the attack from ever starting. Big cats and hyenas hunt by sneaking up quietly. Fire takes that option away completely. The light, the smoke, the way the flames jump and move without warning. Every part of it tells a predator's brain the same simple message. Stay back. For the first time in our long, dangerous history, the deadliest 12 hours of the day became something you could actually survive. Not because humans got stronger, not because they got faster, but because they figured out how to control a small, controlled fire and keep it burning through the night. Here's where the story gets interesting, because keeping a fire alive all night is not easy. It is not something you can just set and forget. It takes constant work. Someone has to feed it more wood. Someone has to watch it, so it doesn't die down to nothing while everyone sleeps. Someone has to keep an eye on the edges of the light, watching the dark for movement. And that person was never doing this job alone in silence. A researcher named Polly Wiesner at the University of Utah studied a group called the Jew/Hoansi Bushmen, who live in the Kalahari Desert in a way that's still close to how ancient humans once lived. In 2014, she published a study comparing what they talked about during the day versus what they talked about at night. During the day, most conversation was boring and practical. Complaints, who owes who what, arguments over land and food. But at night, sitting around the fire, something changed. Over 80% of the conversation shifted to something completely different. Stories, songs, myths, jokes, gossip about people far away, ceremony. Wiesner found that firelight itself seemed to change the mood. People's faces softened. Arguments faded. The tension of the day just melted away. The people she studied described nighttime as a time when the real business of the group happened. Not survival business. The business of simply being human together. So think about what this actually means. The most dangerous hours of the entire day, the hours when every predator around had a huge advantage over us, were also, by pure necessity, the hours when humans were forced to sit still in a group, facing each other for up to 10 hours straight, with nothing else to do but talk. That is not a small coincidence. That is the beginning of something enormous. Here's a detail that changes the whole shape of this story. Our brains did not build their skill for language and storytelling during the busy, noisy daytime. Daytime was for hunting, gathering, walking, working. Most of it happened in silence, or in short, quick bursts of talking about the task in front of you. It was the forced stillness of the night, the roughly 10,000 nights any one ancestor might spend sitting by a fire, because moving around in the dark was simply too dangerous. That created what some researchers call a bottleneck for passing down knowledge. Think about what that means in plain terms. If you wanted to teach someone which plants were safe to eat, where the water dried up during a bad year, how to track a wounded animal, or which valley flooded 20 years ago, the fire was your only classroom. There was no book, no chalkboard, no video to rewatch later. And unlike daytime, when everyone scattered off in small groups to hunt or gather, the night pulled the entire group into one place at one time, with nothing else competing for their attention. Now look at what that produced. Some of the oldest stories still told on Earth come from Australian Aboriginal groups. These stories accurately describe the shape of the coastline from roughly 7,000 years ago, back before the seas rose to where they sit today. Nobody wrote that information down. It survived 7,000 years purely because people repeated it to each other, night after night, for hundreds of generations in a row. That kind of accuracy over that much time does not happen by accident. It happens because of a specific, repeated ritual, sitting together in the dark, with nowhere else to go, forced that information to be told again and again until it became permanent. And it wasn't only survival facts. It was myths, origin stories, explanations for why the world worked the way it did. Every single human culture ever studied has its own stories about the moon, about darkness, about what happens once the sun disappears. Someone had to invent every one of those stories. And based on everything we know about how ancient people spent their nights, the most likely place any of them were ever invented is exactly where you'd guess. Sitting by a dying fire, unable to move, staring into flames, filling the scary, empty hours with something other than fear. If a story like this is making you rethink your own nighttime habits, hit subscribe now, because the next twist in this story is even stranger than the last one. Now here's something that should genuinely surprise you, and maybe make you a little uneasy. The darkness wasn't only dangerous because of predators outside the fire. It may have also done something strange to the human mind itself. There's something researchers call sleep segmentation. A historian named Roger Kirch of Virginia Tech spent years digging through old court records, personal diaries, and medical notes from before electric light existed. What he found breaks the simple picture most of us have in our heads. Before artificial light, many people across different cultures did not sleep in one long 8-hour block the way we do today. Instead, they slept in 2 separate stretches. Historians call them first sleep and second sleep, with an hour or more quiet wakefulness sitting right in the middle of the night. During that quiet waking hour, old records describe people praying, talking softly, resting, thinking, sometimes even visiting a neighbor. Kirch's research suggests this two-part sleep pattern might actually be closer to what the human body naturally wants to do, and that it only disappeared once artificial light stretched our evenings out and pushed sleep into one single, tightly packed block. If that's true, it means something wild. Our ancestors weren't just forced to sit awake in the dark because of danger. Their own bodies were built to wake up in the middle of nearly every single night, right in the quietest, darkest, most dangerous hour there was. That strange middle-of-the-night window might be one of the most important and most completely lost parts of the ancient human experience. It was quiet enough to think clearly, dark enough to imagine almost anything, and dangerous enough that whatever you imagined probably had teeth. And here's where the fear becomes something we can actually measure, not just guess at. Researchers have long noticed something called the dark instinct. It shows up almost everywhere in the world. A jump in worry, a rise in imagined threats, a pull towards superstitious thinking. And it happens specifically in the dark, even in people whose families haven't faced a real nighttime predator in hundreds of years. Some researchers believe this isn't something we learn from movies or stories. They think it's a genuinely ancient leftover switch in our brains, tuned over hundreds of thousands of years in a world where the dark really did, most of the time, contain something that wanted to eat you. Every horror movie that uses darkness and unseen threats to scare you is pulling on a lever that got installed in the human brain around a dying campfire, long before movies, long before written language, long before almost anything we call modern life. Now, put all of these pieces on top of each other, because none of them happened alone. They all happened at the same time, every single night, for roughly 10,000 generations in a row. The fire had to be watched, which meant someone was always awake, which meant groups built early watch systems, taking turns through the night. That is one of the earliest forms of organized teamwork we can reasonably guess existed in the whole human story. The forced stillness gave storytellers a captive audience, which may be the actual starting point of complex language itself. A story told to people who cannot walk away rewards detail and skill in a way that a story told to someone already halfway out the door never will. The real, honest fear of the surrounding dark created pressure to explain the unexplainable, which many researchers believe is one of the deepest roots of religion and myth. The need to give a name and a shape to the thing moving in the grass that you cannot see. And the broken up sleep pattern gave every single person, not just the storytellers, a quiet, private window in the middle of nearly every night to simply sit with their own thoughts. That is something most modern humans, glued to a single unbroken sleep and a phone screen glowing until the second we pass out, almost never experience anymore. Here is the detail that ties this whole story together, and it's the one that should make you look at your own nights a little differently. This wasn't a small pattern. It wasn't something that happened a few dozen times or a few hundred times. This loop, tending the fire, telling the stories, fearing the dark, waking in the quiet middle hours, happened almost every single night for roughly 10,000 generations. That may be the single most repeated behavior in the entire history of our species. More repeated than any hunt, more repeated than any migration, more repeated than any tool ever made. And what came out the other side of all that repetition wasn't just survival. It was us, the instinct to gather around a shared light and tell someone something. The pull towards stories as a way of understanding a confusing world. The very specific, very old unease that darkness still gives you, even though you, personally, have almost nothing real to fear from it anymore. You already know this is true, even if you've never thought about it before. Try it tonight. Turn off every light in your house. Put your phone somewhere you can't reach it. Sit in a room by yourself for 10 minutes in total darkness and just listen. Something in you, something old, something that has absolutely nothing to do with your real modern-day safety, is going to start paying very close attention to every small sound you would normally never even notice. That is not you being silly. That is not your imagination running wild for no reason. That is roughly 1 million years of nightly training, repeated over and over, sitting quietly underneath your modern brain, just waiting for the lights to go out so it can go back to work. Somewhere around 50,000 years ago, a small group of people sat around a dying fire in total darkness. Something moved in the grass nearby, and they couldn't see what it was. And instead of only sitting there afraid, someone started talking, maybe about where the water was, maybe about a strange shape they'd seen in the sky. Maybe they just talked to give the fear somewhere else to go. The person sitting next to them listened and remembered it, and told that same story again the next night, when the fire burned low once more. That loop, repeated night after night for 10,000 generations, might be the actual starting point of everything you now call human culture. Not the hunt, not the tool, the dark, and everything we did just to survive being afraid of it. So the real question isn't really what ancient humans did after the sun went down. The real question is this: how much of that 10,000 generation habit is still running quietly inside you right now, every single night, whether you notice it or not? If this made you think differently about something as simple as turning off the lights, that's exactly the kind of story this channel is built around. Subscribe now, because next time we go even further back, and what we uncover might change the way you see something you do every single day.